Usman W. Chohan was born in New York City to parents who were at time diplomats in Pakistan's permanent mission to the United States. Both rose to become ambassadors of Pakistan. The father, M.J. Chohan, was appointed Pakistan's ambassador to France, permanent representative to UNESCO, and High Commissioner to Malaysia and then to Canada. His mother, Naila Chohan, was Pakistan's ambassador to Argentina and currently to Australia. Under their auspicious wings, Usman has called 9 countries home, including the United States, Canada, France, Argentina, Iran, Pakistan, Malaysia, Australia, and China. More so than living in a country, Usman, however, concentrates on living in a language. He's passionate about learning new languages and is fluent in 8. As a hyperpolyglot, his list includes Mandarin, French, Spanish, and Urdu, among others. In fact, out of the 7 official languages of the World Bank, he has only 2 more left to learn, Russian and Arabic. Usman has been a consultant with the World Bank Institute in the Department of Social Accountability, working on issues of governance reform and specifically the implementation of parliamentary budget offices to help bring impartial and non-partisan financial expertise into governance institutions. His work with the World Bank led him to collaborate with and inform experts as far apart as Sydney, Washington, D.C., Vienna, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, and Ottawa. His work is being used to challenge and redesign the laws of budgetary institutions in even the strongest democracies, such as in Canada, where his work was used to inform the vigorous parliamentary debate on amending the Parliamentary Budget Office Act. Prior to the World Bank, he was the Special Situations Analyst in the Global Equities team at Macquarie Investment Management, the investment arm of the National Bank of Canada. His team of 6 investment professionals, all MBAs from McGill University, like Usman, managed $3 billion in investments across the equity markets of the globe. He joined the global equity space only months before the GFC hit, but soldiered on for 5 years through the turbulent global markets. Usman has an MBA in Strategy and Leadership from McGill University. He has done master's coursework at MIT Tsinghua and a bachelor's in management from Western in Canada. He is currently pursuing a PhD in economics on a full scholarship from UNSW, where he is exploring the fiscal policy implications of legislative budget offices. Given that his last 4 residences were Montreal, Buenos Aires, Canberra, and Beijing, you will likely find him roaming somewhere between these 4 coordinates at the ends of the earth. Today, he is with us to discuss how the multilateral institutions that have directed the path of international development efforts are undergoing tremendous change as new players from emerging economies alter the status quo and thus redefine the discourse of international development. So please welcome Usman.
Testing. Can you hear my voice? Okay, cool. Hi, everybody. Before we get into the actual meat of this presentation, I'll get a few things out of the way. First of all, I'd like to thank Macquarie University. I'd like to thank the GLP program, especially Tara, who I consider a personal friend. I just want to say that in an issue that is so big, so vast, with so many people involved, everybody is a small observer, a small participant. So when you see all this stuff and you hear such a laudatory introduction, you should know that I am a very, very tiny part of the big picture. And so what we're going to talk about today is a little bit of me, a little bit of you, and then the World Bank that I had a small part to play in, and how that institution now is being challenged, quote unquote, because it's not really a challenge according to some people, it is a challenge according to others, but at least the field in which international development is taking place is transforming, because there are new agents in the field. We're going to specifically talk about the AIIB, which is basically taking shape as we speak, right? So this 2015 is like an anno mirabilis. This is the year where international development is perhaps never been as exciting to think about. So as I just said, the structure is me, then the World Bank, then the dynamics that are changing, and then we'll get to you. Okay, so he is the famous guy. So I don't know some famous I don't know who this guy is, but look at this map of the world. There are 10 cities up there, and there's a small exponent on there which signifies the years that I lived in that city. So imagine you grew up in a hometown, you have friends there, and you associate with that place. Imagine somebody who has to move around every 2 to 4 years. And the transformations from one place to the other are radical. So for example, this diagram begins with New York City, right? So 4 years, and then I basically went to the opposite of New York City, for better or worse. It's Tehran in Iran. And then 4 years in Islamabad, 4 years in Kuala Lumpur, 2 years in Paris, etc., Toronto, Buenos Aires, Montreal, Beijing, and then Sydney. I really spend more time in Canberra, but I want to say that I'm part of Sydney. Right? So imagine growing up in that kind of context, how that shapes your idea of questions that are simple, like, hey, where are you from? Okay. And in terms of, I like this map because the voyage is like how many miles you traveled and all that. So that's about 60,000 miles up there for the movements from place, like I'm going to move to a new home. Okay? That's about 60,000 miles up there. The laudatory introduction said that I speak languages and I'm interested in learning Russian and Arabic, and that's very true. But I mean, if you have lived in 10 countries, it shouldn't be unusual that every time you move to a new place, you consider it your new home. And so you absorb you immerse yourself in that culture as if that is the new truth. You leave everything behind and you open your mind to a new idea, right? So that's how these languages came to come. The hardest one is number 5, Mandarin. It's something that I spent 3 years learning. I'm still terrible at. I tried so hard. But now there's room for a couple more, and then maybe I'll retire from that. Education-wise, as was said, MBA, and now doing a PhD, doing it here in Australia, doing it on legislative budgeting, how fiscal policy is impacted by parliamentary budget offices. Still working on it, that's fine. And this is my career. So there's just 2 things on there, but they're 2 things that shaped the way I view the global economy, how I view the differences between countries, between substructures in the economy. All of that arises from these 2 institutions. So I was in global equities, and I started basically in 2008. I started in May. And May 2000, it was a great time. Like, you come in, you're like, oh, this is the best time ever. The economy's never been better. Oh, I'm so happy. And then September 6th, I think it was 2008, September 6th, Lehman Brothers collapses. And so, like, 3 months into it, you're like, oh, this is awesome. And then suddenly, like, the market is down one day, it's up one day. And to be honest, it's still been like that because the structural issues of the financial markets have not been completely resolved yet. Right? And we're talking 7 years ago. And after working for about 4 to 5 years at the National Bank of Canada, which was an awesome experience, started my MBA and got the opportunity to work with some of the brightest people I've ever met. And that was a small team at the World Bank that I will tell you more about. Okay? But I want to put everything into context, what that April 2008 was like, right? Raise your hand if you are below the age of 25. Okay, raise your hand if you're below the age of 20. Right, okay, so this is like, you were 13 at the time, right? You're just hitting puberty at that time, right? It's very different. And that, I was hitting that. So I had grown up with these values, as in when I was moving from country to country, there were some salient things like, oh, working for Wall Street is cool, or making money is cool. And the way that it was is, they had a mantra back in those days, like the baby boomers, so the people before us, said, the one with the most toys when he dies wins. Toys meaning your assets, your house, your car, and all those things. And there was a far more vocal expression of the fact that, I'm richer than you, so I'm better than you. What happened after the crisis? People said, well, why do we define ourselves by money? Or by our monetary achievement? That's not sustainable. So you have the cute emoji there. And going through that crisis, seeing that economic crisis, being a small part of it, but at least being at the forefront every day, you get this news and you're like, oh, but how does this change everything that I've been thinking about? It made me think over time that there must be more to finance than generating alpha. Now raise your hand if you don't know what generating alpha means. Good, because you shouldn't know what it means unless you're specifically in finance. But this is the first technical thing of this presentation. Alpha is the idea that you perform better than the stock market, which you're being compared to. So if the ASX here is up 10% and you're up 10%, did you really do anything special? No, you didn't outperform. It's nothing impressive. Let's say the market is down 10% and you're down 10%. You can say, oh, well, I'm not that bad. Everybody's down. Conversely, if you surpass the market, if it's up 2% and you're up 4%, you'll say, I have added something, I've generated alpha. Alpha is that metric. So that's how finance thinks. That's how people in finance compare themselves generally. I started thinking, well, there's more to the world than just that. Like outperforming a stock market. What? This knowledge of finance and wealth and prosperity has broader applications. And that mantra that, oh, he with the most toys wins, and greed is good and all that stuff that you hear in the movies, like, is greed really good? I wasn't too clear on that. And I said that, well, there must be more to life than this, and the emoji like that. There has to be something more where I can use my financial expertise to make the world a better place. I don't want to just be sitting in an office necessarily. I did enjoy it, but sitting in an office and just working through these numbers, and I don't see how I am making a difference in the world. So at the World Bank, I got to play a small part in using financial expertise to advise politicians on how they can work with their national budgets. So this is what it looked like when I was at the pinnacle of my short stint at the World Bank, where here I am with some of the smartest people I've met. By the way, the person on the extreme left is actually a member of the NSW Parliament. The person second from the right is Mitch O'Brien. He's actually a Sydney-sider. So with this team, with these people, we were actually working out how to advise countries on building parliamentary budget offices. The idea is that financial experts who are not into politics, they don't take political sides, they just analyze projects and policies, and they advise politicians on the merits of the economy itself, that this thing will produce this return at this cost to society over this term. Not that, oh, I believe that, inequality, yeah, I'd take a stance on Republican issues or Democrat, none of that. So just the purity of finance to advise politicians who often don't know how to manage a national budget. I mean, what is the size of the budget here? I think it's about 300 billion in appropriations. I don't know, something huge. How can politicians deal with such a complicated document? Well, if you have expertise that is neutral and advises them, then you can start to analyze the same document, but with more analytical rigor. That's the idea. Okay. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the World Bank Institute itself. So the World Bank is a very large organization, and we will get to that. But where I was a very small part of the bank. It's a think tank called the World Bank Institute, which is just about know-how and expertise. And how they work is, their philosophy is open knowledge. Right? So whatever we are producing in terms of intellectual output, the idea is that we share it with the stakeholders for the sake of sharing it with them. Collaborative in the approach. So let's get the stakeholders to learn from each other. Part of what we did was to bring parliamentary budget officers from developed countries with developing countries, and they talk to each other. That teaches them that their issues are universal, that their struggles against the political system are across. That's everybody has to deal with politics, these kinds of things. and providing innovative solutions. So I am a strong proponent of the Parliamentary Budget Office. I think it's an innovative solution. And what's scary about the world today is while we progress in science and technology, while we're becoming richer than ever, there's some basic structures of society that aren't moving forward, like politics. It's still back. You can think like maybe 2,000 years, you've had the same issues. So one thing is stagnant while the rest of society moves forward. Technology is moving so fast, and we have the same basic quarrels in society. Okay, and so the World Bank Institute has 7 areas that it works in. I put a big halo on governance because that's where I was. But I mean, think about the topics that are mentioned here. Are they not important? Like, raise your hand if you think climate change is not important. I should see like no hands up there, right? Or fragile and conflict states. So if you have a stable government, goes a long way in terms of rebuilding society, but also moving step by step towards financial inclusion, towards growth and competitiveness, health systems. That all comes from having a stable society. So what they're tackling is broad issues, large areas, and then providing those innovative solutions in them. It's a very cool place to work, a think tank like that, right? So connect and leverage international expertise. I said that already. Investing in the how of reform. Now, within the World Bank Institute, the Parliamentary Strengthening Program was a small part of governance. So, Parliamentary Strengthening Program, governance, World Bank Institute, World Bank. You see, there's a hierarchy. So it's a very tiny department in a very big arena of development. What the Parliamentary Strengthening Program does is it basically wants to inform parliamentarians on how they can do better budgeting, manage the resources better, take a bigger stake in the political game in terms of serving the people, you know, serving the interests of the poor, et cetera, et cetera. So we're just trying to make the politicians behave better, but not by coercing them, but showing them the merits of being nonpartisan and impartial with big issues of long-term consequences. Okay, so we're using economics to fix politics. That's why I had this guy up. Raise your hand if you have seen Sean McAuliffe ever. Mad as hell. You guys really should watch this. So everybody's sad that Jon Stewart is leaving. Well, this guy is like a Jon Stewart of Australia. And one episode I thought was hilarious was before the budget was passed this year, Tony Abbott says, there's nothing in the budget for the budget enthusiasts, for the devotees, right? And I was, Sean McAuliffe is like, well, what is a budget devotee? What is a budget enthusiast really like? And so they made this skit where she's like, we're all gonna dress up like Joe Hockey, right? But what does a real budget devotee look like? It doesn't look like that. That's a parody, it's a caricature, but a real budget devotee is like this, where I took a strong interest in the budget here, I take a strong interest in budgets everywhere, we're looking at the line items, we're seeing how it impacts society at large and what are the longer term consequences of decisions made now. So for example, the budget this year will have very far reaching consequences beyond the fiscal year, these kinds of things. So I don't look like her, but I certainly symbolize the same idea. That's the idea behind this. Okay, so The Godfather had this awesome line about this. What's the relationship between finance and politics? Well, finance is a gun, and politics is knowing when to pull the trigger. Well, that's exactly it. That's the kind of field I want to be in. And so what you can learn about finance, and then you can bring that financial expertise towards knowing when to pull the trigger for the right reasons. Okay? And so here's, for example, an event that took place in Austria. And a lot of cool people were talking about parliamentary budget offices, and we're pitching it to parliamentarians, and I'm in the back over there. Okay? So look at how we've come in the last 7 years then, where I, in 2008, money, 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 right? No. Now, I connect with the values of the millennials. You guys are on the same page as I am on this, where it's not really about how much money you have in your pocket. It's whether you're doing something right. So yes, your sense of advancement and motivation and happiness, it's a state, I'm very happy with my life now. And so the mantra is YOLO, right? That's what it is. Do you use your powers for good or evil? No. Do you use your powers for good or awesome? Because you're doing the right things. Okay? So that's sort of my narrative. Now let's talk a little bit about the World Bank. I think I'm just talking too fast. I think we've covered about a quarter of the presentation already. But that'll leave more time for Q&A. And I expect intelligent questions from you. Okay? So the World Bank is an awesome place. It has, in the 20th century, basically since end of World War II, it's been a cornerstone of the efforts to spread the message of international development. And their motto is to fight for a world without poverty, to advance the cause of poverty eradication. Okay? But look at the kind of muscle it has, where it has 220 billion in capital, like in the abstract. Doesn't mean it gives it all of that out, but I mean, that's the muscle that it can draw on. And it has had a AAA rating for over 50 years. Now, I put that in because Australia has been, observed. It's had a AAA rating for a long time, but it might not have it forever. And so one thing I want to bring up when we talk about the World Bank is that it is such an important, such a large organization that is doing so many good things. We have to keep in mind what it really is. So I put the three faces up there. There's the happy face, which is the World Bank, right? Because the World Bank itself focuses on healthcare, education, governance, all the happy things. But then there's the IMF, which is like the angry face, like we lent to this country and it has been irresponsible and now it's time to pay up and these are the structural adjustment programs that you'll have to go through, like serious. It's very terrible to be in a negotiation with IMF. Ukraine, circa 1999, Pakistan /1999, Mexico /1994, I think Argentina /2001. All of these countries had really nasty negotiations because they were in big trouble. You only go to the IMF when you're in really bad trouble, and it's like a lender of last resort for sovereign nations. Okay, so that's the angry face. Now, the third face is the IFC. That is a neutral face. The IFC, the International Finance Corporation, is more like we're going to build a dam in Mozambique and it's going to cost this much over there. It's all math. It's all project management. Neutral face. So these are the three faces. When we talk about the World Bank, some people have a very negative opinion of the world, but some people have a very positive opinion. Well, we have to break that down. What's wrong? What's right? Why didn't you like them? Okay? So look at the stuff that the World Bank itself deals with. I already listed healthcare, education, all that, but there's more to it. So I've highlighted two there. Governance, you've already heard that I did that. But there's also extractive revenues and energy. Why did I highlight that? Because the work that I was doing was to improve the governance, the parliamentary strength, parliamentary capacity in extractive-rich countries. So what does that mean? A lot of the countries that we consider to be extremely destitute actually have the natural resources to advance their development agenda. For example, Nigeria is an extremely wealthy nation, and yet it is not, in the sense that it hasn't diverted its resources towards developing certain institutions in society and including everybody in the financial equation. But it has more than enough oil, more than enough resources to build it. Other West African nations too. And that is one of the great tragedies of our times, is that the countries that we look at and say, it's so unfortunate that they aren't already developed. It's because it's unfortunate since they have the resources to do it. So that's where I was working specifically, is how do you make the institutions like the Parliamentary Budget Office help advise the parliamentarians on their extractive resources, because in countries like that, oil revenues tend to be a very big part of what they get. So they don't tax as much, or they can't tax as much, they don't have a tax base. Where's the money coming from for the budget? The money is coming from oil, diamonds, etc., copper, whatever. That's why I highlighted those two. Okay? So when a multilateral institution lends out, it classifies the countries according to their ability to pay back, their credit worthiness. So you have two lines here. It's a subtle difference. It's not that important, but there's IBRD and IDA, and the difference is that the terms at which things are lent to the IDA tend to be softer because the credit worthiness of these countries is not as high as those in the category IBRD. Okay? Talking about the organization in terms of people now, not in terms of function, there's a lot of people involved, and you can say that there's 2,000 people that do admin, and then there's like 12,000 technical experts. But I drew a little arrow next to STC, short-term consultants. So the World Bank, let's say in the 80s, had very generous employee terms. Like working there was like job for life, awesome, they'll pay everything. But it's not really like that anymore because the World Bank has gone through restructurings over the last 30 years that have sort of flipped tasks around, flipped the working conditions here, and they found that rather than paying retirement for somebody because you use them for 6 months, why don't you just bring them in for certain projects? Private sector has been doing that at the same time, concurrently. So the idea is, I was a little STC. I just hit my own mic. STC. I'm an STC, for example. Okay? So that's exactly what I just said. It's a restructuring, but I love this Dilbert cartoon where the guy's like, hi, I'm here to change everything. Sorry, I gotta go by. All right. You just come and you're done. So short-term engagement has its advantages and disadvantages, right? Because yes, you can do something for the bank, but you're not totally a part of it. Like you served it, you're a short-term consultant. They'll bring you in when they need you. So it's a different work culture. So the reason I brought this up is if you guys are thinking about working in a multilateral institution, keep that in mind. You might not get a job for life. You might be brought in for a certain assignment, and then you might have to find something else to do. Okay? Now, this is where it gets interesting. This is where the dynamics that we really want to talk about today come up. So the voting shares of the World Bank are not equally distributed according to the size of economy or anything. It really reflects basically the winners of World War II, kind of, right? Like the size, that's a long time ago. Minus Germany, which was not a winner in World War II, but the United States, or Japan even, but United States, France, and all these countries, right? I mean, it's basically what the imperialist powers were a while ago. Like, it doesn't reflect modern day economies. For example, the United States has 16% of the vote. And as I'll show on another slide, every president of the World Bank has been an American. One was an Australian at birth and he became American. Doesn't count either. All right? So, here you go. Okay? So, United States. I mean, this is a planet with more than just the United States, right? So how are the decisions at that high level decided? Well, the agreement between the powers after World War II was that it's convention, it's not an agreement, but it's convention, is that the World Bank would have an American and the IMF would have a European. So like Christian Lagarde and all these people, the Europeans then worked at the IMF and then an American would work at the World Bank. Okay? Now, I want to be very clear. In this presentation, we're not going to insult anybody, belittle anybody, say anything negative. I have brought this person's picture up just to wonder about the work culture that somebody with this background would bring. But this is Robert Zoellick is a very intelligent man. I'm not saying anything negative about him, okay? In fact, he was here a couple of months ago in Sydney talking about pretty much what I'm talking about today. at least the third part of today's presentation. He's talking about the same thing. Very intelligent man. But what I'm wondering when I see his bio is where he worked before. So wherever you work will have a huge influence on how you manage organizations when you rise to the top. So as I said about my work experience, it's influenced me enormously. Okay? So his experience, Robert Zoellick, he was the head of the World Bank, worked at Goldman Sachs, right? Worked at Fannie Mae. Raise your hand if you don't know what Fannie Mae is. Okay, very cool. So Fannie Mae is basically one of those institutions that served as a form of insurance for housing. But the way housing and the way insurance works is that if everybody loses their home at the same time, the equation breaks down. So Fannie Mae went into trouble and had to be protected by the government. Same with Freddie Mac. So he worked at two institutions that were at least, if partly victims, but partly perpetrators of the crisis in the housing market, right? Not to blame them, they're not the only ones, but they were part of the issue. They were definitely there when stuff hit the fan, right? So I wonder then if this man is heading the World Bank, what kind of culture he brings in, as opposed to the current head of the World Bank. He drew a little heart there too, next to his name. This is the doctor. This man was building houses in Haiti for the poor. He is a health practitioner. How is a doctor's approach going to be different from somebody from the Goldman Sachs when they had the World Bank? That's what I want to get you to think about. But I'm not saying one is better than the other. But I want you to start thinking about how leadership affects the culture of an organization. This is one way to contrast it, right? So that's a bit of stats there. You don't have to go through that. But basically, he's a doctor who built lots of homes in Haiti. Nice guy. Different culture. Okay, and we could talk about other criticisms of the World Bank, like, oh, what have they done with certain countries and this, that, but does anybody know where this reference is from? Raise your hand if you know. Okay, not that many people, but it's an old movie. But the way this guy would speak, he'd be like, yeah, if we could leave this to the end, that would be great. So, we're just going to leave the criticism to the end, right? Now, talking about Australia. Most of you here are citizens of this country, Australia. Not all necessarily. You're interested about what role your country is playing in this. So Australia is a very important economy, but you're wondering, is my country doing enough for the rest of the world? How can I do a lot for the rest of the world? That's why you're here. Let's talk a little bit about what role Australia plays at the World Bank and then in banks similar to that. Okay? So they have a voting share, right? And they typically focus on projects in East Asia and the Pacific region. And Australia's focus in projects that are associated with the bank tend to be infrastructure, health, education. So that's cool. But policy reform is an interesting thing that Australia is involved in. So it chairs working groups, very important working groups that decide on the policy issues, right? And in terms of talking about the management of the bank, Australia's involved at that level, okay? They were involved with something I thought was very cool. It was a green bond, a kangaroo green bond. So a bit of that sustainability flavor is coming into their participation to the bank. And Australia also leverages the region, so gets votes from other members in the area, and they together work on issues that are relevant to the region. So it plays a leadership role in Oceania, this part of the world, South Pacific issues that go through the World Bank. So it plays a leadership role in this region. That's the key takeaway. Okay. And going back to that picture in Austria, said Australians, right? But maybe Australia does working group stuff, but there's actually a lot of talented people in institutions like the World Bank who are from Australia. You don't know it at first, but in this meeting, for example, in this picture, there's 2.5 Australians. I'm an honorary Australian because I'm here, a resident. That's fine. But there's 2 actual Australians in this picture. So that's like covers 2.5. Oh, Covers half of the image. Not bad, right? Okay, but there's an institution where it plays a bigger role. It punches above its weight. It's the Asian Development Bank. The Asian Development Bank is based in Manila. That's a politically acceptable headquarters for the Asian area. And this bank, just like the European always heads the IMF and an American always heads the World Bank, a Japanese person always heads the AIIB. Look at the list of directors. And there's no, I was born in Australia, but then I became Japanese. They're all Japanese. Okay, and 5 to 8% of the voting, depending on how you score voting, what percent, but 5 to 8% of the AIIB's voting influence is Australia. Okay? It's very big. Here's a list of projects that they work on. So there's Solomon Islands in there. Yeah, there's Papua New Guinea. Cool stuff. Kiribati. There's cool stuff that they do. Fine. Here's what I'm worried about with the AIIB. And this is going to lead to our next part. And I've got the Jackie Chan picture like that. Here are the voting percentages of the shares of the Asian Development Bank, and the largest one is Europe. Right? Japan, fine. United States, okay. You go to Canada, has a higher percentage of the AIIB than Indonesia. France has a higher percentage than Pakistan, which is a big Asian country too. So what's going on here? Is this the right forum for an Asian point of view? For developing Asian countries, if Canada and Germany and Italy, France, it's not an Asian forum. Fine. So the new dynamics are coming in. You see this picture, you saw similar designs. This is a Polish artist, Paweł Kuczynski. I like him very much. You should look him up later. He draws politically charged images like this one. Okay? So AIIB, that's what's happening right now. Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. China took the initiative because China has reserve capital. That's one reason, but China also thinks that there should be a forum for developing countries. There's many reasons we'll talk about, but there is a huge movement towards it. 60 countries have signed up, roughly, including Australia, even though there was lobbying from the United States that countries like the UK, Australia shouldn't join. And Japan certainly, because Japan, as you saw, every head of the AIIB, the Asian Development Bank, is Japanese. They're not in it. But a huge swath of countries joined. The main people who are missing, US is missing, Japan is missing, fine. Latin America was missing because they weren't, there's a lot of stuff happening in their region that they didn't see this coming, didn't participate. And a lot of Middle East, North Africa is not in it right now, but they've also been going through a lot of upheaval, so they're not into it. But pretty much everybody else is on board with this idea. 60 countries, okay? From what we know now, because it's still evolving, they have a 20 to 30% share in China and veto. This will be very important. So if there is some issue, dispute, veto power is very important in multilateralism. For example, in the UN, and the beauty of the UN is that any country can come. The representative from the most obscure, small republic will come and he will make an 8-hour speech and everybody has to listen because all countries are equal. But then the problem is when 3 countries like that talk for 24 hours, the veto country will come and say, "That's so kind, Mr. Delegate," and now we'll move on to the next issue. That's it. So veto is very important as a strategy, as a tactic when you make large multilateral organizations. The reason for the AIIB, what do you think? Well, China has a lot of reserves. China believes that developing countries need to have another forum. You saw the issues with the AIIB and the World Bank, so there is a valid reason for that. There's no reform coming in from the US Congress in the sense that every tactic that has, I shouldn't say tactic or ploy, but every gesture that has been made to reform the World Bank has been put aside by the powers that be. So we need some kind of reform. If it can't be within this institution, we'll bring in new institutions. Fine. Okay? AIIB was number 1. Then the BRIC banks. So BRICS, raise your hand if you know what the BRICS are. Everybody should know what it is, right? Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Okay, and then the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is China plus Central Asia, etc. These are new forums for leveraging capital that has been accumulated as these countries develop. So you're seeing new voices come up, and so the World Bank is all of a sudden like one important, respectable player, but in a bigger field with new agents. Cool. Well, what are the big questions with this now? Whenever there's a new agent of this magnitude, there's uncertainty. So, well, the IMF gets pretty tough with countries when it's time to repay, right? I mean, then there's a negotiation process, fine. How's the AIIB going to do that? Are you going to have the long arm of the law? How are you going to do it? What are the terms that you're going to lend on? Are the credit rating agencies that are typically there, S&P, Moody's, Fitch, are they going to play along with this new system? So when you talk about what's happening in international development, you've got these new layers to think about. And I'm here to bring these things in front of you, things to think about. Okay. 2 other projects, the New Silk Road, it's related to the Shanghai Cooperation thing, where basically the interior of China should be developed by connecting it to Central Asia, expanding westward from there. Fine. And then unilateral moves. So China and Pakistan, for example, have been friends since the late 40s. They trust each other, they can start to do things on their own. And so China has invested made the promise of investing $46 billion in Pakistan over X number of years. I think it's 10 years to 15 years. And what's that going to look like? What's the big advantage for China in that? Look at this map. All of the main industrial activity happens in the coastal regions. The East is way richer than the West. Now you have to make the West come up with the East. That's the policy idea. So what's the fastest way to do that? Look at Kashgar. It's called Kashgar in Chinese. And you go straight down to Gwadar, and you're straight in the Middle East. Why would you go all around Singapore? No. These kind of strategic moves, unilateral actions, are redefining engagement between countries at the same time. Now, if you're interested in international development, you won't participate in a unilateral action like that. You won't be a part, but you'll be seeing it happen. This will re-engage, because if a new force in development says, this is our idea, and it's blocked by someone else, a unilateral move will just bypass it. So now it's becoming very complicated. It's also becoming very exciting. Okay? So what's the World Bank's reaction to this? Well, they welcome it. It's the official statement, right? But what is the World Bank going to be in the long run if all of the capital or most of the drivers of growth, of lending for multilateral ideas and institutions is outside the World Bank? In the long run, possibly it could just become a knowledge base where it brings best practice and advises countries on what is the right way to implement certain projects, complex projects. If that's the case, it'll just become like a big version of the World Bank Institute, a think tank, where I was. So the World Bank, as a lender, somebody who that had a big voice, might become a partner, has to sit down, become part of the big conversation, and might not be the dominant voice. We don't know. Okay? Now here's something awkward that happened. Okay? So the World Bank had issued a report about the Chinese financial system, and it said, oh, this need for reform, and ooh, something, well, exactly, with distorted financial system. And China says, what? Care to repeat that? They're like, no, no, we didn't say anything. They redacted what they said. So this is not a big incident, but it's symbolic of how things are being negotiated. You say something and then they say, what? What was that? No, nothing, no trouble. Okay, already you're starting to see renegotiation at that level, okay? So that chapter about the distorted financial system, it's not wrong. And the stock market right now, not necessarily wrong. I don't know if it's right or wrong. And the current movements in the Chinese stock market also raise questions. We don't know. But the fact that they said it and then said, sorry, we didn't say it, That's what you should be monitoring from that, okay? So, my big lesson here is looking at the history of these multilateral institutions. The important thing is to look back at how they have evolved, where they're going. There was a time when there was not one voice in the world, there was many voices. We're going to a time more like that. We use history as a mirror, okay? 以史为鉴，可以知兴起. Use history as your mirror, you will understand the rise and fall of ideas, nations. Fine. Okay? There are two things I want you to think about. I think I'm running out of time here. I'm going to hurry that up. But this is one of the most fascinating graphs I've seen in recent history. It is the economic center of gravity. This is from McKinsey Global Institute. So the point that you have at 81 was basically the weighted average area that was surrounded by economic activity. So the center of world activity weighted by other regions around it. At the border of Pakistan, because it was surrounded by the Middle East, China, India, Indonesia, all these. That's the weight. And over time, it moved up towards, well, let's say Europe around, before World War I, fine. Then it moved closer to Iceland. Why? Because North America became so large. That's the weighted average, right? Because North America is a huge player. Even today, the United States is 25% of the global economy. It's still very tilted towards this. And over time, it's coming back to its origin in the heart of Asia. And the data point isn't here, but that 2025, 2050 is going to be very close to 1000 AD, which is also a 180. So we're using history as a mirror. It's gone, but in the long run, it's arrived to the equilibrium point. So when you take a 2,000-year view of history, then you say, oh, fine, okay, I see that these are part of bigger trends. Okay, and one other thing. So another thing that blew my mind away. So China used more concrete in 3 years than the United States used in the 20th century. That's a lot of building, right? So 3 years, 100 years. Think about it, okay? So where is the weight of the world going? Well, it is happening in the East again. And as Australians, it's coming closer to home. Good, right? It's not a bad thing. Part of that is construction and investment, and part of that is big institutions to help voice this muscle. If everything is happening in the East again, and somebody has to speak for the East. Why does France have a higher voting share than Pakistan for the Asian development? No. Voice for the East. That's the idea. So last thing. I've gone a bit over time, sorry. But you. Okay, so this is my contribution, bringing everything down to you. Fine. Over the last decade, have gone through a lot. And I think that there's 6 things that you, at this stage, I asked you to raise your hands if you're if you're below the age of 25, everybody raise your hand. You're all very young, and you have to start thinking about this decade of your life coming up, from 20 to 30. 6 things you need, I think. Well, the first is, as you guys enter the job market, you have to cultivate mentors. Start thinking about this, that there's somebody who has to take a stake in your career. Good to have good grades, but not everybody here can be number 1 in the class by definition, but all of you can have important, meaningful, caring mentors who promote your career further. This is something you have to think about now. So I have had 3 mentors. I had one at the National Bank, Ambrose Piscopos. I have one at the World Bank, Rick Stapenhurst, and I have my PhD supervisor. He's a mentor, Kerry Jacobs. These people have invested in my career. It propelled it much further than I would have gone alone. I couldn't go very far alone. Mentorship. I put the picture of the Godfather there. Somebody take care of you, That's what you need. Adaptability. I don't think anybody here is unadaptable. I think you guys already, if you're in this room, you already think like this. But there's one saying I really love. It's attributed to a Muslim sailor, Ibn Battuta. It says, traveling is first it leaves you speechless, and then it makes you a storyteller, right? Adapting to new situations is something that will define the premium you can put on your career vis-a-vis your competitors, your peers. Okay? So adaptability, that's my student card. It's in, yeah, right? But I mean, that's me. It was fun. I was living like that. It's totally cool. I didn't feel out of place. Look. Right? Okay. Qualifications. Yeah, you're all going to have undergrad degrees. That's fine. But go a step further. There's the CFA if you're in finance. There's yada, yada, yada. I totally agree with this because I'm taking a PhD. It's another few letters after my name. Qualifications are very important for somebody to scan your resume and say, okay, well, you have done this peculiar thing, you've done this particular thing. Good. Keep adding, keep adding. Bachelor's degree or the master's degree is not going to be enough in the new paradigm. Okay, again, okay, this is Art of War, one of my favorite quotes. 事故生并献身而后求战. So you make yourself invulnerable and then you pursue war. So you work on knowing the company you want to work for, 100% know it cold, and then you apply. You get to know the industry and then you talk about it. You get to prepare now. Right now you have a lot of free time. A lot of young people, including myself back in the day, kind of, we went into the workplace and we were like, I'm just willing to learn. No, you have to know in advance now to set yourself apart. Use this time to get to know what you're going to be doing in the future. Foreknowledge is the technical term, right? From the Art of War. Fine. Unique traits. It speaks to the other things too, but like, everybody's special. My mommy says I'm special. That's great, but are you really special? Like, does your employer think you're special? You have to set yourself apart with things that are both interesting, unusual, and meaningful. It's hard to do. For me, I'm not special, but I have set myself apart from my peers. If you are working at the World Bank and you say, yeah, I speak 5 out of the 7 languages, I don't mean to brag, but you have to set yourself apart. Okay? Non-linear thinking is very important today because we were taught, oh, if you're a good person and you pay your taxes, blah, blah, you're going to be happy at the end. Non-linear thinking, you might have to work in one location, move to the other. You might have one boss and then another. You might have to do things in a non-linear fashion. And this picture is one of my favorite pictures. It's a portrait of Malala. And think about non-linear thinking. What was her destiny in life? You're going to do this, you're going to get married, you're going to have babies. No. I'm going to think in a non-linear fashion. I will define my career. I will let you know what I think. You set the terms of your engagement with the world in a non-linear fashion. Don't follow the path that is set out for you. Honestly, I don't even know if there is a path set out for you as in us. There isn't. Okay, linear me this, right? The reason I think in a non-linear fashion, I believe, is because I never had a path, right? I didn't know what the next destination was going to be. I never knew that I would be here in this audience speaking to you. But I am. Great. I never knew where I was going to be the next stage. Non-linear thinking. Fun. And last, not least, take an interest in the bigger issues. There's so much happening in the world that is good and bad. Something that's worth celebrating, something that's worth mourning. Take an interest in that. For me, that's the biggest thing, that I took an interest from a very young age in what is happening beyond what I see. Because I was always out of place. I was always in countries where I didn't really belong. That's fine. It made me think about what is bigger out there. And that's your job now, to start thinking about what are the big things out there and where you can make a difference. I was a very small part of the picture. I made a small difference, but I thought about the bigger issues. Voila. That's it. Thank you for your time.